and for joining us today at Cooped Up with Carmen and Rodney Fong, President and CEO of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. The Cooped Up with Carmen series is a great information session for our elected assessor, Carmen Chu, to bring a guest speaker almost every week to answer some of the most frequently asked questions we receive from the community. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our elected assessor, Carmen Chu. Carmen, you're on mute.
Every time it gets me, that mute button. Thank you, Vivian, for the introduction. And we're very, very excited to join you today with Rodney, who is with the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. We're heading into our 8th week of shelter in place. And I think that we've seen a lot of positive impacts with regards to the public health impacts. So we're seeing a flattening of the curve that I think many people have heard about. And that's been a very positive outcome compared to some of the other experiences that we're seeing across the country. But that being said, I think many of us are definitely understanding and feeling the pains that are associated with the economic stoppage. So many of our small businesses are having to wonder about whether or not they're going to be able to survive through this crisis. And many of our workers, our neighbors, our family, our friends are also unemployed or are seeing significant reductions even in their work hours. So I think many of us have top of mind the impacts of what the economy slowdown has meant for us on a personal level. That being said, I think in order for us to be thinking about the future, we really wanted to make sure that we were doing it in a thoughtful way. I think this is a crisis just like not like any other. It is one that is intimately tied to public health. And so myself, alongside with Rodney, have been tasked with 2 other co-chairs, Jose Cisneros and Rudy Gonzalez from the Labor Council, to really speak to and think about how it is that we might be safely re-engaging our economy and to hopefully build San Francisco back in a way that is even better and stronger than before. So today I'm really, really pleased to be able to bring as my guest to talk about this idea about economic recovery and what that future could potentially look like, my friend and colleague, Rodney Fong. So I'm going to take a quick moment to read you his bio and then we're going to get started. So Rodney Fong is a 4th generation San Franciscan. He has an extensive business and civic background, including serving on the city's planning commission for 8 years and with 2 years as president. That's quite a commitment. He formerly served as president of the San Francisco Port Commission, chair of the San Francisco Travel Association, and was on the boards of Super Bowl 50 host committee. He served as a 3rd generation operator owner of the world famous Wax Museum at Fisherman's Wharf until its sale in 2013. And so Rodney, I think, has a lot of experience not only with the civic kind of engagement and San Francisco governance, but also in terms of the business community and really understanding some of the deep impacts that we are seeing with the slowdown in travel and everything else. And so I think maybe just to start off, I want to just ask Rodney, as president and CEO of the Chamber, you work with businesses of all types, different sizes, small and large. Can you tell us, and I know that you are having a lot of conversations with those businesses that are impacted as well. Can you tell me what you're seeing on the ground? Can you help describe for us some of the things that your folks are experiencing?
Sure, Carmen. Thank you for having me on Cooped Up with Carmen. It's a delight. Yeah, on the ground, it is what you think it is. It's pretty dismal. We're fearful about the number of businesses that are going to make it through this. We all know people who have been furloughed or laid off. And so I'm very concerned about job retention and retention of existing businesses in San Francisco and the jobs that are rehired, that are recreated. So we're all feeling it. I want to thank our mayor and our governor for sheltering in place early, because I think this could have been much, much worse. And knock on wood, San Francisco and the Bay Area has maybe been scathed from some of the worst of it. The economic disaster, though, is catastrophic.
Yeah.
We already knew, all of us in this room, how fragile small business was, the vacancies that we had in San Francisco.
Right.
All of us here in San Francisco at least have 1 or 2 restaurant friends, and we all knew that they were struggling. It was a very thin margin in a very competitive space. Some of the things that we sort of forgot just 2 months ago were taking place. I just want to make mention. There were so many restaurants in San Francisco, and for any restaurant to survive, they need to have a lunch and a dinner business to really support the staff and support the back of the house and the rent and the insurance. Because San Francisco swells to almost double during the daytime, there are a lot more lunches than dinners that are served in San Francisco. And so I think for a lot of them, they were fighting and competing with each other over that space, over that meal. I also think that going forward, that the traffic patterns will very much change in San Francisco. We're realizing right now that we can actually do quite a bit through Zoom. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the city actually, the workforce sees 2-3 days a week working from home, and then we'll come and gather for our meetings and our board meetings and such when we need to be really face-to-face. We all also probably will be very selective and deliberate about what we choose to go to. I know, Carmen, you and I have bumped into each other at, the 4th event in the same night, and whether or not people are going to be able to have that mentality to do that, we're going to be very selective about the 1 or 2 things, the most impactful things, and not necessarily bounce around. I mention all that because it's going to change the landscape of business, whether it's small business or big business. It's going to change the pedestrian flow of things, and we don't know exactly where that's going to go. But the real message is I think we need to be all adaptive. Adaptive as business owners, but also adaptive as a city. And the city government needs to be realizing that a restaurant may start to sell and have to start to sell goods. A restaurant may really depend on delivery business to survive. A restaurant might become more of a lifestyle experience where there's clothing and produce from the people who are supplying or working there. So we're going to have to be creative. We're going to have to be patient. We're going to have to be lenient as far as allowing the creativity to flow in San Francisco. I do believe that creativity can get us out of this, along with some good competitiveness. And if any place in the world, I've spent so much time listening to others around the country and around the world, and as we're following this economic recovery path, San Francisco is in a beautiful spot for a couple of reasons. Weather-wise alone, when we talk about outdoor seating and outdoor experiences and allowing business to open if they're outdoors, we have a year-round ability to do that. In other cities where it shuts down because of snow, they can't do that. So we need to realize that we have that advantage, take advantage of it. I love the MTA Slow Streets program that they've begun to roll out. And why not those great alleys that we have downtown? Why not those great alleys in Chinatown to activate them the way that we've always talked about? This is maybe a little bit of a spark to be able to do that. The technology community that we have here is a great opportunity to utilize that. And the healthcare industry that's based here in San Francisco, much of the research for COVID-19 is coming right out of our own UCSF. And so we have all the pieces to make San Francisco an even stronger city than it was before.
Yeah, you've given us a lot to be thinking about in just a short amount of time. But it makes me really think about how recovery could look, because I think unlike past downturns that we've had, whether it was the Great Recession or the .com bust, this is very, very different because it is so tied to public health, right? We know that in order for full economic activity to happen, at some point there needs to be either immunity, vaccinations, or some kind of thing that allows us to gather more closely than we currently are, right? And so I wonder what your thinking is about, what are the things that we need to be doing to make sure that as we're recovering in a safe way? Because I think that's top of mind, because ultimately, if you are a consumer, like you said earlier, whereas in the past, you and I would be at 5 different events at night at the same time, and we would just see each other at different events, people are going to be much more selective about what they're going to do, because every time they go out, there's a risk of exposure, right? And so tell me more about how you think what we should be considering or thinking about as we have a health-minded sort of recovery.
Yeah, so in the last 8 weeks or so, we have over 2,000 members of the Chamber of Commerce. And over the last week, they've been sending me their tidbits, their ideas, their suggestions. So much of it, Carmen, is operational. So much of it is a big high-rise building and how they want to, maybe have their doors automatic so that by motion sensor, they open and there's touchless things, elevators that are voice command, 13th floor, please. things like that that really are innovative, that can be implemented, that become operational. It'll take many years before we fully get there, but there are a lot of things that we can do right now to help open up. And I think your biggest point is that, we are very anxious to get back open, but we want to do this carefully. There may be only sort of one really good chance to do this, because, and I say that because most businesses, especially small businesses, they don't have the capital to open once, falsely, be forced to close, and then have the capital again to open a second time. So we've talked about, and we've heard about, like a V-shaped recovery, a U-shaped recovery, a long L recovery. What we're really most fearful is the W-shaped recovery, where we have a false open. Everyone's excited, but the consumer confidence isn't there, because we haven't established a clean policy. We haven't established the good housekeeping of clean system in our city or in our state, and that they open and there's just not the business there. And so they're forced to close. They've hired everybody up. They got the kitchen back going again, and then they're forced to close. But then that causes a second wave of capital needed to open that second time. We think that's going to be really detrimental if we put ourselves in that position. If I can really quickly, and it may seem some people are very anxious to get open, we're seeing other states open very aggressively.
Right.
One of the advantages, and I think, and I'm on a weekly phone call with all the different chamber of commerces around the country, and they are going at it. They're hard at it. One advantage of us maybe taking a little more time and thinking it through is we're watching them very carefully. We're watching where they have success. We're watching where they have failures, and we want to make sure we don't repeat that. So there's some advantage day by day that we just hang back a little bit if we can. I know it's difficult and it's costing some people their lives.
Yeah.
But it's really the smart way to go about it, and be patient. I can't say enough. This whole recovery to me is about doing it gracefully and doing it having patience with each other. Tensions are going to rise as we get closer to wanting to force to open up, but exercising that patience is important. If I may, two things, Carmen, and I'm curious your thoughts as you are a parent, not of a school age yet, but well, it doesn't seem natural that the Chamber of Commerce would be so concerned about the public school system. We are deeply involved in encouraging our public school systems to figure out how to bring kids back into class safely. And we don't feel like until the school systems statewide are fully set up to receive kids, we never get our full workforce back. And those two are so tied hand in hand. 38% of our workforce are parents or caring for elders. And so those senior centers, those schools, private, public, need to get back up and going. The second piece that we really want to make emphasis is on the equity of internet access. And in so many of our San Francisco businesses, our headquarter businesses, if we want them to remain in San Francisco and be successful, this now means that internet access in Milpitas, Hayward, Sonoma, Healdsburg, all needs to be good, up in the mountains even, so that they can be productive and still contribute to that San Francisco business. So again, like a lot of things, Carmen, that you and I have talked about over the years, they're regional conversations, they're Bay Area conversations. And I was pretty happy to see when all the counties decided to go shelter in place at the same time, that was a great time where all the counties came together and actually, agreed and decided to do something for the betterment of the whole Bay Area.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a complicated question, and I think it's something that we're all grappling with, because things are so interlinked, right? And so, like you said, even though the chamber is more focused on business and so on, in order for business to function or the economy to function, there are backbone services that exist that are government services, for example, that really help to facilitate the possibility of people working. So that would include our public transportation system. It includes our school systems, right? I think what's complicated about it is that in both those instances, which are backbone services for the economy, there's high concentrations of people in our current setup, right? So this is not about imagining what that future look could be. But people are kind of like, they're in the BART buses or the trains together, right? And kids are in the classrooms together, that kind of a thing. And so I think DPH, our public health officers, are well aware that they are important functions, and how do you how do you potentially reimagine that in a safe way to happen, right?
Yeah.
Because at the same time, kids, I know this too. Kaylee puts everything in her mouth, right? She's an 11-month-old right now, and good luck with me telling her don't touch that or wash your hand first. That's not just going to happen. So I think there's just some challenges associated with that. But I absolutely agree. I think for us to be able to get our economy back moving, some of these systems support questions do need to be answered, and they're things that are complicated but are important. On the second point, you talked about internet access. And I think about this a lot in how you were talking about resiliency and how a very terrible scenario is a W-shaped recovery, right? Where you have open and close and open and close, because the ability for a business to gather up the capital to reopen again and to make the effort to find the workforce to be able to do that again is very hard, right? So I take that to heart, because as we're thinking about our economic recovery work, I say, okay, there's the immediate things that we can do to help facilitate the safe opening of our economy. That's really important. The word safe, I don't just mean to throw it in as a token word. That's a really important element of this, right? But the second piece of it is, in the intermediate term, short of us having a vaccination or something that is more wide scale, creates wide scale immunity, for example, we're going to have to think about, well, how do we help businesses be in an environment where they're going to be resilient, where workers will also be able to be resilient, knowing that there may be waves, right? If there are, once, it's no surprise, but once we allow for more interactions to happen, you're going to see more infections typically, right? Yeah. Unless there is some kind of a widespread health breakthrough, right? And so I think even this question about access to online kind of capacity is one that is tied to this idea of resilience for business, right? So if I'm a business who currently has the wherewithal to have a web page where I might actually be able to sell and market my products, where I can still sell to consumers and be able to mail them things or allow for pickup, I'm in much better shape than someone who really can't do that at all and don't have a web presence at all, right? And so it speaks to me about also the potential for businesses to be able to weather a little bit better, sometimes some modifications in orders, potentially, if they also have a web presence as well. I mean, it's just some initial thinking about that, but I do agree there's going to be much more demand. There already is for technology and connections, right? And so anyway, I think points well taken, a lot of really good thinking for us to be looking at. I'm curious to hear, you spoke a little bit about this earlier, but there's this idea about the aspirational place, right? So COVID-19 is going to be changing. It changes how we do business, how we're doing business, and probably will change how we do business for a long period of time into the future, right? Or period of time into the future. I think also COVID-19 is going to create this opportunity for us to see the usage of public spaces and general space in a different way than we have before. So you talked about those big avenues that potentially could be opened up and so on. Do you have any other kind of thoughts about how businesses are thinking about and how they're adapting to what that new normal will look like? Like what has been some of the energy that you've seen in the private sector?
Yeah, this is funny because I have such a personal interest in the public space. And planning, urban planning. And as you mentioned, spent 8 years every Thursday night sitting on the Planning Commission and hearing big, massive projects like the 5M project. And the very next item, someone's deck and a fight over sunlight in someone's deck or an expansion of a home. And so it is really, it is a really unique place that we live in, partially because of the hills and the views that we have and that we are stacked up on top of each other. And so all the more reason, I believe, like a lot of great cities like Tokyo or New York, where they really take advantage of their open space. They really use the High Line as the living room and add a tourist attraction for New York. Tokyo takes advantage of its restaurants and its bars and its karaoke lounges as restaurants and entertaining spaces. And I think San Francisco is at a point where we can do that. This is going to be a wide eye-opener for so many different things, whether it's transit, whether it's building, whether it's housing, and whether or not, we have a real question. And one of our biggest challenges before was building more housing. I think we need to do that, but I think also that equation maybe has changed a little bit. I'm going to be very fascinated to see if the same number of people flock to the cities the way they did before, where there was, they imagined that the job was there. I think part of the reality for a lot of people is that they can work for a tech company, but actually be in Montana months out of the year and work from home. So we're curious to see how that plays out. Yeah, the landscape is going to change, Carmen. And one half of me is very nervous with anxiety about the bad things that could happen, but the other half of me is just giddy and literally fluttering about the opportunities that are in front of us. And I hope that we can drop the politics honestly and really talk about what we want as a better city going forward, and for our kids, for your daughter, what that really is going to look like. So we'll see. I have a very ambitious goal of personally of San Francisco being the cleanest city in America. By London Breed's actions, from as far as COVID, we're actually a very clean city, maybe the cleanest city in the world by our population and the number of cases that we've had. And I know there's a lot of challenges, a lot of politics involved with the homeless crisis situation. That hasn't gone away. That won't go away. But I'm really hoping that there are some conversations where we can deal with that at the same time as economic recovery. And they are hand in hand, trust me.
Yeah.
If we bring all the businesses back, that same homeless problem where the conventions are complaining about visitors having a bad experience in San Francisco, that's all tied together. So I hope we can get on board to a clean city overall from a virus perspective, as well as a street conditions perspective.
And I think it's a good segue into this idea about how we bring the city together in these conversations. And I think one of my hopes, and I know it's part of your hopes and our co-chairs as well, is that we really want to be engaging the public in this conversation about what it means to open San Francisco up safely when the time is right, but also, what do we imagine for that future of San Francisco? And so for folks who are out there, who are listening, one of the things I hope that you will do is to engage with our task force. We have a website that is available. We're going to put it up on our links or on the chat right now, but you can just click onto the One San Francisco website. You're going to see a survey where we're asking for your input and your feedback. And it is translated into Spanish, Chinese, and Tagalog. So I hope that people will be able to participate that way and really join in our conversation so that we're well informed and we hear from all of you. But that being said, I'm going to go to a few questions, Rodney, if that's okay, that people have posed for you. So one of the questions we received was, businesses in the Bay Area are connected. Is the San Francisco Chamber or the task force working with other chambers of commerces or other regional governments to make sure our recovery plan aligns? And are we acting together to advocate for more resources for the area?
Okay, the first part, let me just start sort of locally and expand out. One of the beauties of the Chamber of Commerce is that we represent so many different businesses, all businesses. And one of the other beauties of San Francisco is that we have very specific vertical associations, whether it's a building maintenance association, whether it's the San Francisco Travel, the Hotel Council, the Golden Gate Restaurant Association, the Bay Area Council. And so we've been working with all of those groups over the last 8 weeks, but the last 8 weeks very closely together to try to help each other out, to try to figure this out together. So we're hearing best practices from all of them. We're assembling them into a booklet format. I'm on probably 2 calls a week, national calls with other Chamber of Commerces all over the country who are very different than San Francisco. And some of them, again, as I mentioned, are very aggressive about wanting to open. So I'm hearing all of that and taking notes very carefully about what they're doing. But I think it's unanimous that this pandemic is very different than any other disaster we would have imagined. We were all prepared for the earthquake, which still can happen, and hopefully everyone still has an earthquake kit. But we were prepared for that, and to a larger degree, this is a much more difficult problem because it touches all of us and not just one neighborhood of San Francisco or one part of the state.
Yeah. Can I ask one question related to that, just a spin-off thought? As we think about potential reopening, and again, I think we're going to have to do it in a thoughtful way, and it's got to be measured, and we can't just flip the switch immediately. We're going to have to be watching, I know on the public health side, the health indicators that tell us whether we're moving too fast, because again, like as you mentioned, this kind of start and close scenario is not a good one. I'm curious to know, one of the things that I'm imagining is going to be probably important is going to be businesses' access to sanitation supplies, as well as PPEs or face coverings and so on. Is there an effort from the chambers or from the Bay Area Council or other entities that are contemplating how they might be a resource to businesses who are going to need to access this? So do we just want to have like small businesses and so on just go off and try to secure their own things, or is there going to be some kind of a clearinghouse? What is your thought around some of these things that we know are going to be essential pieces of how we potentially reopen?
Yeah, I know that you and I have maybe seen some of those comments from some of the businesses on the task force asking the city or a nonprofit to help procure the PPE for them. Hey, maybe we come up with our own branded San Francisco version of mask and gloves. I have not heard of any kind of clearinghouse. I'd be very open to helping do that. We're all hearing different messages about who's got resources and who doesn't. But if the chamber can play a role to that, I'd be more than delighted to help facilitate that role so that there's equal protection all the way across. And that, what I'm a little bit fearful of, some businesses who maybe have more capital to send people to a training or get better PPE equipment have advantage over another small mom and pop that just doesn't have the resources to go out and pick up more supplies or whatever. So I think from a San Franciscan perspective, I want to make sure that the underdogs, the little guys, get this fair share of access. So I think it's a great idea, and I think we're going to end up doing something like that, or along with the city of San Francisco in partnership.
It's interesting because I've seen in another city where they've actually created an online presence where they're trying to match up people who want to purchase a certain goods, whether it's masks or other things, with local manufacturers. So a way to really support the money staying in the Bay Area, essentially.
Yeah. You bring up manufacturing. We actually have quite a bit of small local manufacturing that's here in the Bay Area, and a lot of it is design related too. And we talked about businesses having to adapt. The manufacturing side is going to have to, and even on the food processing side, really going to have to figure out how they're not necessarily side by side all day producing. And that means maybe an early bird shift, a midday shift, and an evening shift. And that adds to the spreading out of the working hours of San Francisco. So for the most part, Carmen, we were kind of a 9 to 5 city. I wouldn't be surprised if we are a 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. city, which I think is great because the evening dining experience has kind of died off in San Francisco. I would love to see all of our working hours and all of our playing hours spread out a little bit to help our businesses and spread out the congestion. So yeah, there's a lot of things to consider. I wanted to just, if I could just, thank you for the work that you've been doing in the assessor's office. And, everyone's talking about stimulus packages and where monies might be and grants might be. And half of that equation is, providing capital. The other half is providing savings. And I know your office has been really integral in life-saving in extending some of the business registration fees, in delaying some of the storefront fees, and all of those things add up to a lot when you're a small business. And maybe some people on the phone have taken advantage of that. But I wanted to thank you and your office for doing that.
Thank you.
It's not all going to be about handing out cash and handing out money, but the savings are really important. And so on both ends, it's really important.
Yeah, I think we, there are a lot of people in the city, myself, Jose Cisneros, our treasurer, and others who have really been thinking about, what is it that we can be doing on a local level? Because so much of I think one of the things for folks to know is that our taxation system, our licensing system, just the governmental system has many layers. It's like the federal requirements, the state requirements, and then the local requirements. So I think where we started off first was really to say, what are the local levers that we could be pulling to help businesses on the immediate side? The challenge is that a lot of the things that that we would like to do or want to do more of, we either don't have the capacity or funding to do it at the scale that the federal government could do. So you saw that with the PPP funding, for example, where 350 billion was oversubscribed in 10 days, right? So, for San Francisco to be able to provide, we don't have anything near $350 billion, right? Or even, just a level that kind of came to California. So I think one of the things that I'm very well aware of is that we can do some things on the local level, and they are, but we also are well aware that they're not at a scale that's enough for some businesses too. And I think, like you said, we are hopeful that the little things also help and count for helping businesses. And so I think there's a big interest in doing that. We really are going to have to lean on our state and federal partners to assist also, right? And so everything from, can we coordinate the mass purchase of PPEs and other things that can be done better at scale, as opposed to every little group trying to fight for their share and try to drive up prices, right? I mean, even something like as simple as that, I think is important. The federal government, of course, has the ability to be able to put out mass kind of funding or loans or other kinds of programs that we wouldn't have necessarily the capacity to do at the same level that they do. So I think that for me, there's an awareness of what it is that we can be doing and how we need to be partnering with the state and local governments to accomplish some of those things. So I think that's a pretty big issue. And I think the other thing also is that just as it is, this is impacting our businesses and our residents, it also impacts city government too. And so we're anticipating that we may have a $1.1 to $1.7 billion budget deficit over the next 2 years. And so, you know, top of mind for a lot of folks on the city side is to say, wow, we're going to have to be contending with having to make budgetary cuts and making tough trade-off decisions at the very same time that people are looking for support and help. Right. And so yeah. I think that's going to be a very tough conversation that the city will be having in the next year or so. I mean, even our budget process was pushed back. Typically, the budget gets introduced for June for the following year. It's been pushed back to August this year so that we have a little bit more time to understand the economic impacts before we try to inform what our resources will be for the coming year.
You are always very modest, but no one knows the city budget and the process probably better than you. How do you think we've, even in 2008, been in a situation like this where the city budget needs to be, you know, every single line item in 08 was looked at, but even in this case, we need to look at every single line item. As you pointed out, a lot of people, maybe out of frustrations, like, you know, has City Hall laid off people? We've had to lay off, but I don't know if you want to do that, because these are the people that you're going to depend on to get the city back up and running. So I'm just curious your thoughts on how, if there is any kind of strategy or thought to, you know, everybody's going to have to take a haircut here, everybody.
Yeah, I think so. Just to provide a little bit of scale, when I talked about that 1.1 to 1.7 billion, that was just based on information that we knew back in March, right? Since that time, we've had a whole month of additional impacts, additional information that's come through. So for example, in the month of April, I think our numbers for unemployment claims went up for like to 100,000 or something like that, right? And for scale, when we were in the throes of the Great Recession, I think that number was more like 45,000. So almost 2 times the number of unemployment claims that have been processed or coming through in San Francisco. On top of that, when we were taking a look at the 2-year budget deficit, back at that time, it was more like $700 to $800 million. So we're talking about 2 times the level of deficit compared to where we were before. A few things are positive. You know, over the last several years, the city has taken a very proactive approach to creating a reserve, right? And so we knew that the good economic times that we were having wasn't always going to last forever, and that we would see cycles, right? And so the city did build up a significant amount of reserves, but that's not going to be enough to cover this deficit. And not only that, we're also spending money for surge response also, right? We've had to buy additional protective equipment. We had to make sure that our hospital systems are well equipped and ready to go. We've had to run an emergency operations center. Like, all of these different things cost money, right? And so I think that it is going to be very tough. At that time in 2008 and 2009 and 10, which was sort of the lows in San Francisco, I think we had the benefit of being sort of the last to hit or to feel the recession, but we were also one of the first places to come out of it, right? And a lot of that had to do at that time with sort of where the technology sector was and that growth that helped us. But it also, I think, you know, those characteristics that kind of helped San Francisco kind of weather that better, I think are the same characteristics that you talked about that give me a little bit of hope, right? We have a city that is very inventive and creative. We have gone through a lot of different things before, whether it was the AIDS epidemic and other things where we've understood the importance of public health and we listen to science. So I think there are a lot of things that are going for us, a lot of great minds in the Bay Area that could really help us to come out of this. But that being said, with our budget, I do think we're going to have to look at every part of our operations to say, what can we do Are there things that we can defer? I mean, look, I don't like deferring capital maintenance, for example, right? But is that going to be a choice that we're going to have to make compared to, you know, a layoff or something that further exacerbates the economic situation that we're in, right? So I think we're going to have a lot of conversations around what can we forgo, what can we push off, and are there ways for everybody to help out a little in this process, right? Yeah.
Can I ask you a very tough question?
Okay.
That maybe doesn't
Go
have an
for it.
answer, but just something to think about. Like, you know, after '08, we did bounce back strong with the technology sector in our backyard. And that's driven by Stanford and UC Berkeley to the north. How do we potentially just think about, well, we're talking about recovery and getting back to what we know is normal. How do we protect a surge of bounce back that actually is detrimental to the city? And for many of us, there are many great aspects of what we witnessed in the last 2-3 years of great success in the city and where our budget was. But we quickly forget about how crowded the city was congestion-wise. We quickly forget how desirable we were, which is a great thing. You know, it's a champagne problem. But that we don't overbuild, or that we don't create an opportunity where the world comes in and sees opportunistic real estate grab, where the rest of the world doesn't see this as a bottoming out, an opportunity to put more pressures on the city. And I know that's a really delicate question because we obviously want success, but there can be a point where there's too much success. And I point out, because we are still a peninsula city, we are like an island with 2 bridges and 280 and 101. So there is some limitation unless we start some of the long-term infrastructure projects, like building more housing, like a better transit system. And those aren't things that we should, I think those are the things we should talk about seriously, in that they're long-term 20-year projects, but they provide a lot of jobs. And maybe some of the government federal funding that you're talking about. We're late in the game to start an underground system, but we're never like too late to really, you know, begin talking about it if the city is going to be a world-class city.
Yeah, it is a very hard question. So thank you, Rodney, for bringing it up. I mean, I think there's a lot of thinking around that, and honestly, I think this is where we come to this place about aspirations. And I think San Francisco has been always a place that has been inventive and aspirational about what we can be, right? Everything from, can we be a more inclusive city that really recognizes that we have vulnerable communities that are frankly very much impacted by this, and to a greater extent than others. How can we kind of change that? Can we create sort of a more green city while we're at it, right? A place that is going to be desirable. And I think there is room for that conversation. And I think this is a thing with, you know, all of those things on its own often feel to me like they're so insurmountable because they're so big. But I've always found that even with our budgets and so on, the first place that, if you want to reach what that aspirational place is, you first have to start by talking about it and for planning for it. And if you actually invest in planning for it, and you actually invest in talking about it, you might actually see concrete step-by-step things that we can do to get to those places.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
So I think, you know, so as big as those aspirational goals are, I really do hope that San Francisco can get to a place where we talk about some of those things and what that might look like. Because if we can just at least set that foundation and start that planning and start that talking, we get there. By just saying that it won't ever happen because it's too hard to get to, you'll just never get there, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I'll just leave it at that, because it's I do hope that we can get there with this task force also.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because it's an opportunity to be imaginative and ask the tough questions. And we may not get the answers, but it's a time for everybody to ask tough questions about transit Bay Area wide and housing Bay Area wide, not just in the west side of the city, but Bay Area wide. We need affordable housing all over.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you very much for spending the time with us and really having such a great dialogue back and forth. I think there's so much for us to be thinking about. And again, we hope that people will harness even your own creativity and your experiences and share that with us. So please go to our One San Francisco webpage. Again, we're going to post the link, but I hope that you'll go on there and share your thoughts with us, because I think, as Rodney was saying, it's really a great time to try to be aspirational about that future as well, because we need to make sure that we're building hope into what our future looks like, you know, and especially at a time like this, I think that's very important. Thank you.